How you all doing, comrades? My apologies for running late today with CLACCA ULC Homegroup Bible Studies, but we're still having a few technology issues, so I do apologise for that. So today, I just wanted to also acknowledge that the land that we're meeting on is of the Gadigal and the Wangal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to the elders, both past and present. Recognise sovereignty, treaty, and social justice has never been ceded. So today we're discussing Genesis 27, and this particular book. Essentially, now I had previously said that Moses was the author, and while from my latest research, from my latest research, it's that still seems to be the case. But what I have uncovered is that um, in terms of the age, in terms of the particular, in terms of the location, as well as the age of the book, it could be much older than what is initially anticipated. Because I discovered records from Aboriginal people who say it's much older, who say that it's much older than what is alleged in the Bible, because of the fact that Aboriginal people uh, have records of the Book of Genesis, as well as other records of the biblical passages, and I personally I can't ignore that. So knowledge, knowledge, because records in terms of the Bible are always being found, and knowledge constantly has to be dated. Previously, I acknowledge the fact that I previously said between 550 and 850 BCE. See, that was the knowledge that I had access to me at that particular time. And so in terms of the time frame, it's difficult to know when. I think probably the better thing to say is probably it's difficult to know exactly when this period begins because of this new information I have that I can't ignore. I can't ignore because like indigenous people at that particular time, like they helped to create this book, and it would be a disservice of me um to ignore records, to ignore indigenous records that are much older than this, because it was an oral culture, and so we don't exactly know how old this book is. It is is that can be older. That could be older than 2,000 years, years or more. And I think it's important to take into account um, indigenous records, because indigenous records, especially in Australia, like they date back as far as 50,000 years or more, and it's doing a disservice. I personally think when you get new information, when you get new information that dates old records, and but the new information that you get um, is an older record than what you have previously been taught. I think it's important to take that into account. Now, um, so essentially, it could be this book could be um, 50,000 years old. 50. This book could be 50,000 years old. Given the factor that it was an oral culture, given the fact that this book started in an oral culture before the written word, before the written word began to be recorded. Um, I think it's important to take that into account. So, essentially, in terms of dating, for me, we don't. Just gonna say we don't exactly know. No, because of the factor um, of this new information that I have uncovered. Covered. I'm just gonna say we don't exactly know. No. Um, in terms of the age, the age of it. So that's essentially and the other thing, the other factor too to take into account the Book of Genesis. What it was never intended to be taken literally. Literally, like it was essentially it was written at a particular time. It was always intended to be for educational purposes like an Indigenous Dreamtime story. It was never intended to be taken literally. So when I give when I state a particular frame of when a particular book or when a particular really old book was written, that's the information that I have had at that particular time. And it is in no way, shape, or form. It's not a disrespect to Indigenous people. It's just the oldest records I've been able to get a hold of at that particular time. So um, enough said about that. So essentially, in relation to this particular story in Genesis 27, the story of Jacob's deception of Isaac is one of the most dramatic and suspenseful in all of the Bible. Although we only see the actions and words, the characters, the inner dispositions, and are palpable. Jacob's fear, Rebecca's determination, Isaac's indecision, Esau's grief. The story complements Jacob's acquisition of Esau's birthright by having Isaac grant by having Isaac grant them the blessing. That's the Beraka uh, of the firstborn child. In contrast to the story of the birthright, Isaiah in this story is portrayed in a sympathetic light as a brother wronged. The blessings of the two brothers anticipate that they will be in two nations, corresponding to the divine oracle in verse 25, 23. In their decisive role, um, Rebecca acts. Rebecca acts out their love for Jacob, and also brings to pass the divine oracle in 25:23. Jacob's success in gaining the blessing by deception is balanced by the price they pays later in corresponding deceptions played on them. Isaac's blindness provides the key condition suspicions for the deception by Jacob and Rebecca, and sets the stage for their tests of Jacob's identity through their other senses: hearing, touch, smell. Their request to in Ezo, pointedly identified as his elder child Izu, has elements of high and low drama. Their closeness to death and desire to pass along the patriarchal blessing are very serious. But their request for game recalls their appetite driven reason for loving Izu. So that I may bless you suggests that the meal has a ritual or sacred quality. Like Sarah, Rebecca was listening to the conversation. Rebecca's plan to outfox Isaac and Izu on behalf of the child um, Rebecca loves depends on Rebecca's expertise in the domestic domain. Just as Rebecca substitutes domestic animals for wild game, so Rebecca will substitute Jacob for the domestic child for Izu. Rebecca is here the trickster, exercising Rebecca's domestic authority, culinary skills, and intelligence to win their preferred child blessing. Jacob's reservation, based on the tactile contrast between a hairy person and a person of smooth skin, is overruled by the parent. The danger of Isaac's curse, rather than their blessing, hangs over the subsequent scene. Although Isaac never pronounces a curse, Rebecca does pay the price when Rebecca later commands Jacob to flee, and there is no mention of Rebecca ever seeing them again. Rebecca uses domestic intelligence to solve the problem Jacob raised. Rebecca clothes them in garments of the elder child Izu, and on the smooth skin still uncovered, Rebecca puts the skins of the domestic kids. The disguise of the the disguise of the domestic child as their wild brother is now complete. Note that in recompense, Jacob will later be deceived by the garment of their beloved child. The scene of deception is fraught with suspense. Isaac's suspicion seems to be aroused immediately, and each exchange holds the chance of discovery, bringing the parent's curse. Although Isaac recognizes Jacob's voice, um, the parent is deceived by the senses of taste, touch, and smell, as Rebecca had planned, and so you, the parent gives the blessing. The key words in this scene are the pronouns and acronyms. IMS, and it's a very similar experience that I think that transgender people can relate transgender people, particularly us transgender men, can relate to in relation to our cisgender heterosexual counterparts thinking accounts who hang on to biological anatomy, me, me, and me, and think that transgender folks are about trying to deceive people when that is not the case in any way, shape, or form. form. The key words in this scene, occurring 4 and 8 times, respectively, highlights the drama and disruption of the parent-child relationship, and Jacob's response to their parents' suspicion about the speedy success of the hunt is ironic, because the Lord your God granted me success. This is a deceptive reply, since Rebekah was responsible for the quickness of the meal. But it is also true, since God had predicted Jacob's ascent. Ascent. Within the text, the text, I think we can break this up. Within the text, I think we can break this up into two parts. So, part one, part one, is part one. One is the factor that part one is the factor that the parent. So part one of this story is the factor that the parent goes and blesses. The part one is the factor that the parent goes and blesses Jacob instead of Isaac. Isaac. Um, Essentially, the Isaac. Part two in terms of part two of this story is the factor. Uh, Part two of the story is the factor that, as a result of receiving the wrong blessing, the hairier child misses out. The hairier child is considered not as equal, not as equal, and I think that, and not so there are two parts. So, part one is Isaac giving Jacob blessing. Isaac giving Jacob the blessing instead of um, giving the blessing to the other child. Part two of this story is um, Esau's lost blessing. 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 Essentially, the Esau's lost blessing, in which he feels somehow he feels somehow that um, he has lost his birthright. Right, and we can see it right. Um, in front of the text, I think that this is a lesson in relation to what I don't think most scholars take into account is the um, unequalness that the two children were blessed. Why is it? Well, why is it that? Um, why is it that the born, who was a cisgender heterosexual male, um, was permitted a blessing, but the child with smooth skin was considered was simply because they were born was not considered to be equal in the eyes of the parents. So I think what's at fault at fault here is actually in fact the parent isn't actually in fact the parent who should have thrown away a parent because they didn't consider the fact that the second born is just as equal as the firstborn, um, but more to the point that um, regardless of whether a male has got smooth skin or hairy skin, hairy skin. In my case, I've got hairy skin since being on testosterone, and both children should have received the same equal blessings. So this is an educate. This I would say that this particular passage, but the passage, it's an education lesson. In treating all children, it's an education lesson for parents to treat all children equally. To um, bless all children equally, um, regardless of whether a child has got smooth skin or hairy skin. Skin, skin, um, because um, it's not okay in any way, shape, or form, um, because it results in a situation in which one child and like I'm not super nanny by any means stretch, but essentially both children regardless of their ranking order in birth should have received the same equal blessing and not one without the other other um other anyway, that's all for now. That's my kind of my take on the passage. But essentially it's um children my assessment of this particular passage is that um simply more simply because one was born first doesn't make those who were born after any less and that it was the responsibility. What should have happened is that I think that the older brother should have said to his dad, hey, why can't Izu have the same blessing as me? That's probably would have happened. And I think all too often, we don't go into okay, look, um, and that in no way, shape, or form, look, that doesn't that doesn't excuse that doesn't excuse the petty sins etc. But I think that when you get to the hermeneutics behind the texts, and see that this was a situation in which children were not being given the same equal birthright, right? Um, and that while um, right, and I think that in this particular story, um, the parent, the parent has got to equally take responsibility for their actions um, that result in bad behavior of kids because parents are not while it's and I'm no way, shape, or form like in saying this because there's some great parents out there out there. But when you got a situation in which there are behavioral problems with the kid, there, there's a behavior sibling rivaling going on over who's entitled to a birthright. I think what has got to is to remind that um, all children, children, regardless of where you're born at, all children are equal in the all children are equal in the eyes of God the parent. Parent. Um, that's all from me. Thank you very much for joining us, and um, I look forward to seeing you at 5 o'clock for Sunday church. That's all for now. God bless, and um, that's it. Bye.